Tehran's air had a specific weight, a density composed of suspended dust, carbon monoxide, and the collective silence of 12 million people who learned to breathe without making noise. Daniel Lavie felt this weight in his lungs as he walked along Avenida Valjasser, adjusting the collar of the cheap shirt he had bought at a bazaar in the south of the city. The shirt prickled slightly on the back of her neck, a tactile and constant reminder that that skin was not exactly hers. To anyone who crossed his path, to the closed-circuit cameras that flashed with mechanical lethargy on top of the poles, and even to the pomegranate juice seller on the corner, he was Reza Husseini. Reza walked with her shoulders slightly hunched, not out of submission, but with the intellectual weight of someone who carries books and academic concerns. Daniel, inside, maintained the upright posture of a trained officer, scanning perimeters, calculating escape routes, and analyzing the body language of passers-by. Dissociation was an art he had perfected over the years. It was not a matter of pretending. It was a matter of temporarily forgetting the truth. He needed to believe that his childhood memories were the picnics in the Alborz Mountains, not the summers in Haifa. He needed to feel that his political frustration came from years of systemic repression, not from an intelligence briefing read in a secure room thousands of miles away. The meeting point was a small literary cafe near the University of Tehran, one of those places that the regime tolerated with lazy surveillance, allowing the intelligentsia to vent so that the pressure would not explode in the streets. The smell of roasted coffee and aged paper hit him as soon as he pushed the glass door open. The bell above the entrance rang, a high-pitched sound that seemed to cut through the muffled conversation inside. At the back of the room, at a table strategically positioned away from the windows, but with a clear view of the entrance, were they? Karim, with his unshaven beard and the restless eyes of someone who expects bad news at any moment. And Yasmin. Daniel felt the automatic adjustment in his psyche. Reza smiled, a tired but warm smile, and walked over. Yasmin had a stack of papers in front of her, hand-drawn diagrams and coded name lists. She looked up as he pulled up the wooden chair. There were deep, dark circles under his dark eyes, marks of sleepless nights dedicated to a cause that Daniel was there to dissect and eventually neutralize. "You're late," she said, her voice low but firm. It was not an accusation, just a statement of facts. Yasmin dealt with time as if it were a finite and precious resource, something that was slipping through her fingers. "The subway stopped at Ferdowsi Station." Daniel lied, with the fluidity of someone telling the truth. "Random document verification." I had to wait for the line to move. The mention of verification made Karim tense. He ran his hand through his hair, a nervous tic that Daniel had already catalogued in his mental reports. Karim was the brake of that vehicle. Yasmin was the engine. And pray, Reza should be the midfielder. "They're tightening the siege," Karim muttered, looking to the sides as if the walls had ears. They probably did. "Maybe we should postpone. The manifesto is not ready, and security on campus has tripled since yesterday." "We can't put it off," Yasmin retorted, her voice taking on a sharp edge. She pushed one of the papers in Daniel's direction. "The University Council will vote on the new conduct guideline in 48 hours. If we don't occupy the central courtyard tomorrow at noon, if we don't show that we are watching, they will pass the measure in silence. And once it is law, any gathering of more than 3 students will be considered a serious disciplinary infraction. Immediate expulsion." Daniel looked at the paper. It was a logistical sketch of the occupation. Simple, elegant, but dangerously naive. They counted on the hesitation of the guards, on the moral strength of youth. Daniel knew that morality was a flimsy barrier against batons and tear gas. The situation was urgent. The deadline was not only bureaucratic, it was emotional. If they missed the timing of the vote, the movement would lose momentum. Apathy would win again. Daniel needed to make a decision. As an agent, his instinct was to let them fail. That fear paralyzed them. A fragmented and fearful movement was easier to monitor. But Reza Husseini, the charismatic leader he had built, would not back down. If he showed cowardice now, he would lose access to the hardcore. He would lose Yasmin's trust. And there was something else, a variable he didn't like to admit. Yasmin's logic was correct. Strategically, it was the only possible movement for those who wanted to be heard. Kareem is right about the risk, Daniel said, using the measured tone that made the others lean in to listen. Security has tripled because they know we are planning something. They expect confrontation. Yasmin stared at him, a shadow of disappointment crossing her face. So you agree with him? Are we going to stay home and tweet anonymously while they lock the university gates? No. Daniel held her gaze. I say we can't do what they expect. If we occupy the courtyard with shouts and posters, they have the justification for forced dispersal in 5 minutes. We need something they don't know how to fight. He pulled the paper to himself, took a pen from his pocket, and began to draw over Yasmin's plan. Silence, he said, scratching the areas where the megaphones would be. We don't scream. We don't take banners. We just sat down. Hundreds of us with books studying. We occupy the space with our primary function, to be students. If security comes to take us away, they will be dragging young people who are reading textbooks. The image of this is much more powerful than that of a riot, and it confuses the command order. How do you justify beating someone who is reading Plato silently? Kareem stopped biting his nail. He looked at the drawing, considering. The caution in his eyes gave way to a timid curiosity. Passive resistance, Kareem muttered. It's harder to label it as a riot. Yasmin kept looking at Daniel. The disappointment had faded, replaced by something he found disturbingly intense. Admiration. She saw in him a clarity that she herself sought. She saw a solution where there was only conflict. Do you think we can mobilize enough people in less than 24 hours for this? She asked, her voice now collaborative, complicit. If we start now, Daniel replied. But we need to be surgical. No open networks. Word of mouth, closed groups. The message has to be, bring your books. The decision was made. Daniel had just validated and enhanced an event that would put hundreds of students in the regime's crosshairs. He felt the weight of responsibility rest on his shoulders, not the responsibility to protect them, but the responsibility of having manipulated their hope to secure his own position. He was pushing them over the precipice, but convincing them that they were learning to fly. The next few hours were a blur of contained activity. Daniel, Yasmin, and Kareem shared the contact list. They operated at a frenetic but quiet pace. Daniel watched Yasmin work. She was brilliant. His mind connected logistical points with an ease that would be the envy of many analysts at his agency. She knew who had access to the keys to the side gates, who could bring water, who could monitor the movement of the police in the vicinity. In a moment of pause, as Kareem went to the counter to ask for more tea, Yasmin leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes for a second. Sometimes I wonder, she said without opening her eyes, if this is not all just vanity, if we're not just trying to prove that we exist instead of actually changing something. Daniel observed her profile, the taut line of her jaw. It was an opening, a confession of doubt. Vanity seeks applause, he replied softly. You're seeking justice. There is a difference. She opened her eyes and stared at him. There was a depth to them, an intelligence that seemed to want to dismantle Reza and see what was behind it. For a split second, Daniel felt the cold panic of the exposure. Did she know? Did she realize that his words were calculated to echo what she wanted to hear? You talk like you've seen it before, Reza, she said, as if I knew the end of the story. No one knows the ending. He dodged, picking up his already cold cup of tea. We only know the next step, and the next step is tomorrow. When night fell and the cafe owner started stacking the chairs, the plan was hatched. They said goodbye on the sidewalk. The night air was colder, but the tension remained. Yasmin shook Daniel's hand firmly. Thank you, she said, for bringing focus. I was dispersed. Fear does that. Fear is useful, Daniel said. He keeps us alive. He watched her walk away, walking toward the subway station, a lone figure against the gray concrete of the city. Daniel waited until she disappeared from sight before beginning his own journey home. His apartment in the south of the city was a cubicle of anonymity. Second-hand furniture, worn carpets, a refrigerator that hummed intermittently. Daniel locked the door, checked the invisible tape he had placed on the doorframe, intact, and closed the heavy curtains. He sat down in front of his old laptop, a model that matched the income of a graduate student, but the operating system he booted from a hidden drive had nothing in common. The bluish screen lit up his face, stripping off Reza's mask. There, in the dark, he was Daniel Lavi again. He started typing the report. Date, 2801. Origin, Agent 89. Subject, Student Movement, University of Tehran. The cell identified as Alvarada plans a demonstration of passive resistance for tomorrow, 12:00, in the central courtyard. Estimated adherents, 300-500 individuals. Tactics, silent occupation with academic material to hinder the narrative of public disorder. Tactical leadership, Yasmin Farhadi. Subject A. Logistics leadership, Karim Vahidi. Subject B. Agent role, strategic consulting for the consolidation of trust. He stopped. The cursor blinked, demanding more, requiring analysis. He knew what would happen. If he sent this now, Iranian intelligence would not know the specific details, but his controllers would, and the information would flow. Perhaps not in time to stop the protest, but in time to catalog the participants. He was handing out the guest list for a party that would end in interrogation cells. But there was a gap. The initial information he had about the regime's reaction was ambiguous. The Revolutionary Guards were rumored to be testing new facial recognition technologies on crowds. If the protest were silent, faces would be still. It would be the perfect setting for the test. By suggesting silence and stillness, Daniel had not only helped the movement to happen, he could have inadvertently facilitated the mass identification of each student present. Doubt hung over his fingers. He had acted quickly to gain Yasmin's trust. It had solved the immediate problem of how to protest, but the future consequences of that perfect solution were a dark unknown. He was creating easy targets. He looked at Yasmin's name on the screen. Subject A. Daniel took a deep breath, the stale air of the apartment filling his lungs. He finished typing. Recommendation: monitor the response of security forces to evaluate new containment guidelines. The event will serve as a stress test for the cohesion of the group. It encrypted the file. He attached it to an innocuous image of a Persian landscape and sent it through a proxy server that spanned 3 continents. The message has left. There was no turning back. The protest would take place. He would be there, by Yasmin's side, being the hero she needed, as he silently watched the trap close around her, a trap he himself had helped draw so accurately. Daniel closed his laptop. In the silence of the room, the hum of the refrigerator sounded like a scream. He lay down dressed, staring at the damp-stained ceiling, waiting for the dawn that would bring light but no clarity. The republic around him, the impossible happened. There were no screams. There were no slogans. There were no raised fists. There was only the sound, amplified by the acoustics of the surrounding buildings, of hundreds of pages being turned simultaneously. Flep, flep, flep. The noise was soft, almost rhythmic, like the flapping of the wings of an immense flock of birds that refuse to fly. The strategy will work. The armed silence he had drawn on the breakfast table had materialized with frightening precision. There were almost 500 students. They occupied every square inch of the courtyard, forming a sea of bowed heads and book spines. Daniel looked up discreetly, without moving his head. On the edge of the courtyard, the police shock line was paralyzed. Large men, dressed in dark uniforms and plexiglass covers, held batons with gloved hands but did not move forward. The confusion was visible in his body language. They had been trained to respond to aggression, to noise, to chaos. In the face of that disciplined muteness, in the face of the image of young people reading, the order to disperse the riot lost its immediate meaning. A few meters from Daniel, Yasmin was reading a book on fluid mechanics. His hands trembled slightly, but his posture was one of fierce dignity. She didn't look at the guards. She trusted the plan. I trusted him. That moment of tactical triumph, however, had a metallic taste in Daniel's mouth. While his eyes swept the perimeter, his analyst's mind registered what the students, intoxicated by their own courage, did not notice. The police were not attacking, but they were not inert either. Behind the shock line, plainclothes men circulated with high-definition video cameras and telephoto lenses. They didn't film the crowd as a whole, they filmed faces, one by one. With the patience of someone who catalogs insects, the silence and immobility of the students, Daniel's brilliant strategy, had turned the protest into the perfect setting for a mass collection of biometric data. No one ran. No one covered their faces with scarves to scream. No one hid in the smoke. They were there, static, offering their identities to the Ministry of Intelligence database as a gift. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the non-existent breeze. He had protected their bodies from immediate violence, only to expose their future lives to bureaucratic, silent violence. Suddenly, the radio of one of the police commanders sizzled loudly, breaking the trance. The shock line stepped forward, the boots pounding in unison on the ground. The sound was like dry thunder. Some students raised their heads, fear breaking the mask of serenity. The rhythm of the pages stopped. The tension has stretched to the breaking point. It was Kareem who saved the moment, or perhaps condemned him for good. Sitting near the central statue, he did not move. He just turned a page of his book with a deliberately slow and noisy gesture. Flep, the isolated sound echoed. Yasmin, picking up the signal, did the same. Flep. Daniel, acting on instinct and the need to maintain his disguise, followed suit. And then, like a wave spreading across a lake, 500 people read it again. The refusal to react to the physical threat was a devastating psychological blow. The police commander, visibly frustrated, gestured to his men. They did not back down, but relaxed their attack posture. The cargo order did not come. The standoff lasted another hour. An hour of inclement sunshine, of numb legs, and of a war fought without a single bullet. When the university bell rang at 2 p.m., marking the end of the class period, the students stood up in an organized manner, closed their books, and began to disperse, blending in with the normal flow of the campus. It was a victory. It had to be. Later, in the safe haven of a student apartment in the Amirabad neighborhood, the mood was one of suppressed euphoria. There was tea, dates, and nervous laughter from someone who had just escaped from a lion's cage. "Have you seen their faces?" said a first-year student, his eyes shining. They didn't know what to do. Yasmin was in a corner, leaning against the wall, watching the room with a tired smile. When he saw Daniel approaching, his smile opened, genuine and disarmed. "You were right," she said, her voice hoarse with tension released. "It worked. We occupied the space and no one was taken." "For today," Daniel corrected, maintaining the sober tone that was expected of Reza. "We won the day, Yasmin, not war. Let us celebrate the day, Reza." She touched his arm, a light touch but one that burned through the fabric of his shirt. "For the first time in months, we don't feel powerless. You gave us that." Daniel looked at her hand on his arm. Her confidence was a physical burden. He wanted to tell her to run away. "I meant that today's victory would be charged with interest tomorrow, that the cameras had captured everything. But he couldn't. Reza Husseini would not say that. Reza Husseini would smile and accept the compliment. "It was a collective effort," he said, the lie coming out soft. Kareem approached them. Unlike the others, he did not smile. He held a cup of tea with both hands as if he needed the heat to steady himself. "It was too easy," Kareem murmured, looking at the dark liquid in his glass. Yasmin frowned. "Easy?" "Kareem, we were surrounded by riot police." "Exactly." Kareem looked up, and Daniel saw in them the reflection of his own professional caution. They had the number, they had the weapons, and they had the authority. Why did they let us stay there for 2 hours? Why did they allow the image of our resistance to be created? "Because we were smarter," Yasmin insisted. defensively. Because we change the rules of the game. Or because their game has changed and we don't notice, Kareem retorted. He looked to Daniel, seeking support or perhaps confirmation. Did you notice the men with the cameras, Reza? There were many, more than usual for routine documentation. Daniel felt his stomach tighten. Kareem was observant, dangerously observant. If he pulled that thread, the whole tapestry could fall apart. Daniel needed to neutralize the suspicion without dismissing the validity of the observation. I saw it, Daniel said, validating Kareem's concern to gain credibility. It's intimidation. They want us to know that we are being watched. It is the tactic of fear after. If they can't beat us now, they want us to be afraid to go home. Exactly, Yasmin agreed, clinging to the logical explanation. It's psychological warfare, and if we let the fear of these cameras stop us, they win just the same. Kareem didn't seem entirely convinced, but nodded slowly. Reza's explanation made sense. It was plausible, but the shadow in his eyes remained. We need to be careful about the next steps, Kareem said, walking away. Next time it won't be so polite. As the night progressed and the group began to break up, Daniel offered to accompany Yasmin to the taxi stand. The street was deserted, the orange lights of the streetlights creating islands of visibility in the darkness. Kareem is pessimistic, Yasmin said, breaking her silence, but he's loyal. His caution is necessary, Daniel replied. Blind optimism is dangerous. They stopped at the corner. Yasmin turned to him. The streetlight illuminated half of his face, leaving the other half in shadow, a duality that seemed to reflect Daniel's own soul at that moment. Do you know what I felt today, sitting on that floor? She asked. Fear. No, connection. She looked him in the eye. I felt I wasn't alone. That there was an intelligence guiding all that. I trust you, Reza, not only in its strategy, but in who you are. I feel like you see things that we don't. The irony was so acute that it almost made him laugh. Yes, he saw things that they did not see. He saw the reports that would be written the next morning. He saw her photos being attached to a digital file with a red stripe. Sometimes what we see isn't pretty, Yasmin, he said, his voice coming out deeper than he intended. It doesn't have to be pretty, she said. It just needs to be true. A yellow cab rounded the corner, saving Daniel from having to respond. Yasmin got into the car, waving through the dirty window as the vehicle drove away. Daniel stood in the corner, watching the rear lights disappear. He had accomplished the mission of the day. The movement was galvanized, confident, and, crucially, exposed. He had delivered what his superiors wanted, a clear and defined target. He began to walk back to his apartment, the sense of triumph crushed under the weight of a cold certainty. He had just taught Yasmin to trust the hand that would eventually open the door to her cell. The connection was made. The noose was tied. And now every step he took to squeeze it would be a personal betrayal, not just a professional one. In the distance, the sound of a siren cut through the night, a long, lonely lament that seemed to come from the future, warning of what was to come. Daniel noticed the signs before anyone else. It started with administrative errors, library access cards that suddenly stopped working, scholarships frozen for compliance review, enrollment in elective courses canceled without prior notice. It was a surgical punishment, designed to generate individual frustration without creating collective martyrs. He walked around the campus, observing the change in the atmosphere. The euphoria had evaporated, replaced by a low-level paranoia. Students checked their phones obsessively, not for messages, but to see if they still had signal. The invisibility that Daniel cherished so much was being used against them. It was on a Thursday afternoon, while pretending to study in the canteen, that his clean phone vibrated in the inside pocket of his coat. A specific pattern of vibration, two short, one long. He got up, left the tea halfway, and walked to the men's bathroom. He locked himself in the last cubicle, checked if he was alone, and pulled the device. The message was a spam text about carpet promotions, but the code was in the discount number, red priority. Logistics sector. Identify and neutralize in 12 age. Daniel felt his blood run cold. Logistics sector was the agency's euphemism for Yasmin's network. They no longer wanted to just observe. They wanted to cut off the supply routes, the funds, the organization. They wanted the snake's head, and the head was her. He put his phone away and washed his face with cold water. The mirror returned the image of a tired man, with dark circles under his eyes that did not need makeup. He was on the razor's edge. If he did not deliver something concrete, his usefulness as an infiltrator would be questioned. If she delivered what they asked for, Yasmin would be arrested, interrogated, and... He knew that Iranian prisons were not kind to women who challenged the system. The cold logic of his training dictated, deliver the target. The mission is greater than the individual. But human logic, that part of him that Daniel was trying to stifle, screamed something else. He remembered the trust in her eyes, the hand on her arm. He couldn't do that. Not with her. He needed a detour, a scapegoat. Daniel came out of the bathroom with his mind working at high speed. He needed to feed the beast with other meat. There was a secondary, less organized group that operated from an underground in the Tiransar neighborhood. They printed pamphlets and kept posters. They were noisy, careless, and frankly, a safety risk to the main operation. Their leader, a young man named Farhad, had already clashed with Karim several times for his recklessness. If Daniel handed over Farhad's location, he would satisfy the demand for an action against logistics and buy Yasmin time. It was an exchange. One life for another. One group by another. He walked to an off-campus internet cafe, a noisy place full of teenagers playing video games. He sat down on a machine in the background, inserted his thumb drive with the secure operating system, and began typing. It wasn't an analytical report this time. It was an anonymous complaint, fabricated to appear to come from an upset neighbor. He detailed the strange movement in Tiransar's underground, mentioned boxes of subversive material, and meeting times. He knew that intelligence would cross-reference this complaint with the data that he, Agent 89, would later confirm. When he pressed send, Daniel felt physical nausea. He was condemning Farhad and his group, young people who, although reckless, fought for the same freedom as Yasmin. He was playing God, deciding who deserved to continue the fight and who would be sacrificed on the altar of his covering. "It's a miscalculation," whispered a voice in his mind. "You're acting out of emotion, not strategy." But he ignored it. He closed his browser, paid for the use of his computer, and went out into the busy street. The response was swift and brutal. That night, Daniel was in Yasmin's apartment. It was a small meeting, just the strategic core. They discussed how to get around the internet blocks that were becoming more frequent. Yasmin was sitting on the floor, surrounded by cables and routers, trying to set up a mesh network. Karim's phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds, and turned pale. "What's wrong?" Yasmin asked, dropping a network cable. Karim hung up the phone slowly, as if the device had become too heavy. "They blew up the underground in Tiransar," he said, his voice fading. "They took them all. Farhad, his sister, the other 3 who were there. They say that the police have already arrived breaking down the doors. They knew exactly where to look." The silence that fell over the room was absolute. It was not the disciplined silence of the protest. It was the silence of horror. Yasmin brought her hands to her mouth. "Farhad, oh my God." They had just received the paper donation. Daniel remained motionless, sitting on the couch. He forced a shocked expression, but inside he felt hollow. He had done that. That pain in the room. The fear in Yasmin's eyes was his doing. He had saved her, yes, but at what cost? "How did they know?" Karim asked, his eyes sweeping the room, pausing for a moment on each face. That place was safe. Few people knew. "Someone has spoken," Yasmin said, her voice trembling. "Or they were followed." Farhad was never careful. "Or we have a leak," Karim insisted, the paranoia now fully awakened. Such a coincidence. Right now that we were reorganizing? Daniel felt Karim's gaze pass him. It was not a direct accusation, but a question. Daniel held his gaze, wearing his mask of Reza Husseini, the worried strategist. "If there's a leak," Daniel said calmly, "we need to find out. But now the priority is to clean everything. If they caught Farhad, they can have access to his cell phone. If there are connections with us, we have to cut it now." It was a risky but necessary move. By taking charge of the crisis, he deflected suspicion. He positioned himself as the solver of the problem that he himself had created. Yasmin immediately agreed, moved by urgency. "Reza is right, Karim, destroy the old chips. I'm going to wipe the hard drives. We can't leave anything that connects us to Tehran Sar." The next few hours were of frenzied destruction. Documents burned in the kitchen sink, SIM cards broken and flushed down the toilet, formatted disks. Daniel helped with everything. He was efficient, helpful, indispensable. While breaking an old laptop with a hammer, Yasmin began to cry. She didn't sob, just silent tears that flowed as she destroyed months of work. "They were just boys," she whispered. "Farhad only wanted to paint murals." Daniel stopped next to her. The urge to comfort her was overwhelming, but touching seemed forbidden now. Their hands were dirty, metaphorically covered in the blood of freedom from those boys. "I'm sorry, Yasmin," he said, and it was the only truth he had said that night. "It's not your fault," she replied without looking at him. "It's war." No, Daniel thought, it is not war. It's me. He had made a decision to protect Yasmin, but in doing so, he had closed a door. The innocence of the movement was over. Blind trust was dead, and he had introduced a poison into the group, the certainty that there was a traitor among them. Karim, in the corner of the room, was watching everything. He wasn't crying. He was calculating, and Daniel knew that sooner or later, Karim's math would point to the one variable that didn't fit neatly into the equation: Reza Husseini. When Daniel left the apartment that morning, the city seemed more hostile. The shadows seemed longer. He had bought time for Yasmin, but he had lost something fundamental within himself. The line between the agent and the man, between mission and morality, was not only blurred, it had been erased. He was no longer an observer. He was the executioner who chose who climbed the scaffold so that others could live another day. And the worst part was knowing that if he had to, he would do it again. Daniel was running down Engilab Avenue, with Yasmin clinging to his left arm. The air was a thick white mist. Around them, the chaos was a disjointed choreography. Young men running with scarves over their faces, Basij motorcycles climbing the sidewalks, the dry sound of rubber bullets ricocheting off the asphalt. "This way!" Daniel shouted, pulling Yasmin into a narrow alley between two closed bookstores. "No!" she resisted, coughing violently. "The escape route is through Valyasar," Karim said. "Valyasar is blocked." Daniel cut off, his voice hard, authoritative. "They set up a pincer siege in Ferdowsi Square. If we go there, we will be cornered." Yasmin looked at him, her eyes red and watery, a mixture of confusion and gratitude. She didn't ask how he knew. In that moment of panic, Reza Husseini's omniscience was not suspect. It was a miracle. Daniel knew because, 30 minutes earlier, while pretending to adjust his backpack, he had checked the tactical data feed on his secure device. He saw the blue dots of the police moving on the digital map. He knew exactly where the siege would close. They ran down the alley, jumping over garbage bins and puddles of dirty water. Daniel guided not only Yasmin but a small group of students who had instinctively begun to follow him. He was the beacon in the storm. With every corner they turned, every police barrier they avoided for seconds, the legend of Reza grew. He stopped, listened, pointed in a direction, and the direction was free. For the students, it was luck or genius. For Daniel, it was the cold application of privileged intelligence. He was using the oppressor's tools to save the oppressed, creating a moral paradox that made him nauseous. He saved them today so they could be monitored tomorrow. They eventually reached an inner courtyard of an old residential building, far from the front line. The sound of protests arrived there muffled, like the roar of a distant sea. Yasmin leaned against a brick wall, sliding to the ground, trying to catch her breath. The scarf on his head was undone, his hair glued to his forehead by sweat. "How did you know?" one of the students, a boy from the history course, asked, looking at Daniel with reverence. "The police. They were everywhere." "Standards," Daniel lied, controlling his own breathing. "They always close the main avenues first. It is the standard manual of riot control." Yasmin looked up. There was something new about them. Not just trust, but an absolute dependency. "You saved us, Reza," she whispered. "Again." Daniel looked away. Her gratitude was more painful than tear gas. He had not saved them. He had shepherded the flock away from the immediate wolf, keeping them together for future slaughter. While the group rested, Daniel moved away under the pretext of guarding the entrance. Leaning against the iron gate, he grabbed his phone. There was an unread message sent by an emergency channel. It was not from its controllers. It was an automatic proximity alert that he had set up in his own counter-surveillance system. Alert: signal scanning active on grid 4. Someone was looking. Not the police, with their noisy radios, but someone silent, using cellular signal triangulation technology. Someone who knew that, in the midst of that analog chaos, there was a digital transmission that didn't fit. On the other side of the city, in the aseptic heart of the intelligence ministry, the air conditioning kept the temperature at a constant 20 degrees, a stark contrast to the heat of the streets. Mariam Eskandari was sitting in front of 3 high-resolution monitors. She didn't look at the images of the streets burning. That was the police's problem. Mariam looked at data. She was a woman of 40, with a face that looked as if it had been carved out of soapstone. Smooth, impenetrable, and vaguely melancholy. His long, thin fingers danced over the keyboard, isolating flows of information. "What do you have, Mariam?" his supervisor asked, stopping behind his chair. He smelled of cigarettes and impatience. "Anomalies," she said, without turning around. The students' response today was too coordinated. "They have leaders, Husseini, Vahidi, the Farhadi girl. We know that." "No." Mariam shook her head slightly. "Leadership is one thing. Foreknowledge is another. Look at this sector." She pointed to the map on the center screen. Unit 7 closed Valley Asar at 2:15 p.m. At 2:12 p.m. A group of 20 high-value targets strayed into the back alleys. 3 minutes before the order was given via radio, the supervisor frowned. "Coincidence? Luck?" "Luck happens once," said Mariam, her voice devoid of emotion. "Twice is standard. 3 times it's leaking or—" She hesitated, choosing the word carefully. "Or someone on the other side has our manual." She pulled out a side window. It was Reza Husseini's dossier. His photo, taken at the university's enrollment, showed a serious young man with a trimmed beard. "Husseini," read the supervisor. "The speaker. What does it have?" "He's too perfect," Mariam murmured. "Impeccable academic record. Consistent activism, but always within a margin that avoids direct imprisonment. He talks, ignites, but is never holding the Molotov cocktail when the photo is taken. And today, he was in front of the group that strayed from Unit 7. Do you think he has an inside source?" "I think he's a gap," said Mariam. "Look at the financial records. The trips. Everything fits. It fits so well that it doesn't feel like real life. Real life is messy. The life of Reza Husseini is an edited narrative." She closed the dossier. "I want to talk to him. Arrest him? No, if I arrest him, he becomes a martyr and closes himself. I want to look him in the eye. I want to see if he blinks." 2 days later, the university tried to pretend normality. The burn marks on the asphalt had been washed away, but the tension remained in the air as a low-frequency vibration. Daniel was in the central library, pretending to research for his thesis. He needed this alone time. The duality of his existence was beginning to cause fissures in his concentration. He found himself staring at the emergency exits in any room he entered. Sleep had become fragmented, populated by dreams where Yasmin discovered the truth. "Politics as a Vocation" by Weber, said a soft female voice beside him. An interesting choice for times like these. Daniel was not startled. His training took over before his heart could race. He turned his head slowly. A woman was standing at the end of the bookshelf. He wore a traditional black chador, but his face was uncovered. It was an intelligent face with eyes that looked like biological scanners. She held a book somewhere, but her attention was entirely on it. Weber says that politics is the tenacious and slow effort to pierce hard boards, Daniel replied, quoting from memory, maintaining Reza's academic tone. It seems appropriate. Mariam, she said without extending her hand, I am a visiting researcher at the Department of Sociology. I have been following your speeches, Mr. Husseini. Pray, please. He smiled, his smile trained, modest. My speeches are just reflections of a worried student. Worried and... Mariam stepped forward. The distance between them narrowed, subtly encroaching on his personal space. Effectiveness is rare in student movements. There is usually a lot of passion and little direction. But you seem to know exactly where the wind blows before it even starts. Daniel's internal alarm went off. Red alert. That was not an academic conversation. That woman was not a sociologist. Her body language was restrained, economical. She was analyzing it. History teaches us to read the signs, Daniel dodged. The story or the information. Mariam tilted her head slightly. You know, Reza, I studied the movements of '79. There were many voices. But the ones that survived, the ones that really shaped the future, weren't the ones that screamed the loudest. They were the ones who knew when to shut up. They were the ones that seemed to have friends in high places, or friends in faraway places. The insinuation hung in the dusty air of the library, distant places. She was talking about foreign infiltration, she knew, or was suspicious enough to throw the bait. Daniel felt a drop of cold sweat run down his spine, but he kept his face impassive. Friends are useful, he said neutrally, but conviction is what keeps us standing. Mariam smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a chess player who had just seen his opponent make a subtle mistake. Conviction is admirable, she said, but loyalty. Loyalty is a matter of geography, isn't it? It depends on where you were born, or where you say you were born from. She placed the book she was holding on the shelf, next to Daniel's. It was a pleasure, Reza. I'm sure we'll see each other again, very soon. She turned and left, her footsteps silent on the worn carpet. Daniel stood still. He looked at the book she had left. It was a treatise on counterintelligence and asymmetric warfare. It was not a coincidence. It was a warning. He left the library with his heart beating at a pace he could no longer control. The game had changed. He was no longer the invisible hunter. He had been seen. Mariam Eskandari had looked through Reza Husseini's mask and seen Daniel Lavi's gears spinning underneath. He needed to warn his controllers. But more urgently than that, he felt an irrational and terrifying impulse. He needed to see Yasmin, not to extract information, but because, suddenly, the idea that she could be caught by someone like Mariam caused her a dread that was not in the mission manual. The crisis was no longer political. The crisis was now existential. And time, which once seemed like an ally, now ran against him. Mariam Eskandari's visit to the library had been the detonator. Since that meeting, the silence of his secure phone seemed to scream. He knew that surveillance over him had gone from passive to active. They were no longer algorithms looking for patterns. They were human eyes looking for mistakes. The laptop's screen shone in dim light, the only source of light in the room. A message flashed on the encrypted interface sent by its controllers 30 minutes earlier. There were no greetings, no questions about his well-being, just extraction coordinates and a last order. Final order. Transmit encryption keys from the student mesh network. 0 priority. Run before extraction. It was the coup de grace. The mesh network. That tangle of routers and Bluetooth connections that Yasmin had spent nights setting up was the only thing that kept the movement alive and communicable under the regime's digital blackout. Handing over the encryption keys wasn't just about silencing the movement. It was to expose every private conversation, every escape plan, every outburst of fear that had traveled through that network in recent weeks. It was to deliver Yasmin and everyone else on a silver platter. Daniel looked at the blinking cursor. The hesitation, which at the beginning of the mission was just background noise, was now a deafening roar. He was trained for this. It has been shaped to understand that the sacrifice of a few is necessary for the safety of the many. The many on your side of the border, of your people. But geopolitical abstraction failed in the face of the concrete memory of Yasmin's smile, Kareem's stubbornness, Farhad's naive hope. He closed his laptop, unable to press the button at that moment. I needed air. He needed to see her one last time. A farewell that she wouldn't know was a farewell. The meeting was in the same cafe where it had all begun, but the place was different. The windows had new bars. The owner looked older, more bent. Yasmin was sitting at the back table, but there were no papers scattered around. Just 2 cups of tea untouched. She looked exhausted. The vibrant energy of Silent Wednesday had been drained, replaced by a brittle tension. Kareem is not coming, she said as soon as Daniel sat down. He thinks he's being followed. He probably is, Daniel said without trying to soften. We all are. Yasmin looked at him, and for a second Daniel saw the naked fear in his eyes. Not the fear of the police, but the fear that it had all been in vain. We're losing Reza, she whispered. Since Farhad's arrest, it's as if they're always one step ahead. We change the frequencies, they block. We change the locations, they appear. It's as if there were a ghost in the machine, Daniel added. Yes. She reached out on the table and held his. Her skin was cold. But we still have the network. As long as we can speak, we can reorganize. It is our only advantage. The mention of the network was like a physical stab in Daniel's stomach. Her only advantage was his bargaining chip. Yasmin, he began, his voice hoarse. He wanted to tell her to destroy everything. I wanted to say, throw your computer in the river. Break your phone. Escape to the mountains now. But the words died in my throat. If he warned her, his extraction would be compromised. If she ran away now, the pattern would change, Mariam would realize, and the border would close on Daniel. It was her life or his, the mission or humanity. What's wrong? She asked, shaking his hand. You look distant. I'm tired, he lied for the 1,000th time. I just wanted you to know that. What you have built, it's real. No one can take that away from you. Not even if everything falls apart tomorrow. Yasmin smiled, a sad and sweet smile. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. It was a simple keychain made of braided rope, with a small blue stone hanging from it. My grandmother gave me this, she said, placing the object in the palm of Daniel's hand. They say it protects travelers. I want it to stay with you. You are the one who guides us, Reza. You need to be safe. Daniel looked at the blue stone. The weight of that insignificant object was unbearable. It was a symbol of protection given by the person he was about to destroy. I can't accept it, he said, trying to return it. Please. She closed his fingers on the rock. Promise that you will take care of yourself. Promise that when this is over, we will have tea in a place where we don't have to whisper. Daniel looked her in the eye. He knew that future did not exist. He knew that within hours the name Reza would be cursed by her, if she had the chance to know the truth. Or worse, she would be arrested believing she had failed, never knowing that the architect of her fall was holding her hand. I promise, he said, the biggest lie of all, the final lie. He stood up, letting go of her hand slowly. I have to go. I have to check some contacts. See you tomorrow, Reza, even. He left the cafe without looking back. The night air was cold. He walked briskly, turning corners, checking for reflections until he came to a surveillance blind spot he had mapped weeks earlier, behind an abandoned market. He leaned against the dirty wall, took the secure phone out of his pocket and unlocked the screen. The file with the encryption keys was already prepared. The image of Yasmin in the cafe, the blue stone in her pocket, the empty promise. Everything revolved in his mind. But above all, Mariam Iskandri's voice echoed. Loyalty is a matter of geography. He was not Reza Husseini. He was Daniel Lavi. He had a house, a family, a flag that wasn't that. He had a duty. With trembling fingers, not from cold, but from a silent internal violence, he selected the file. Send. The progress bar filled up quickly, 100%, transmission completed. At the same moment, on some server of the Ministry of Intelligence, the lights came on. The mesh network, the last haven of privacy for students, has become transparent. Names, locations, plans. Everything was exposed. Daniel put the phone away. He felt a rupture within him as if something vital had been cut off. He was safe now. The mission was accomplished. But as he walked toward the extraction point, where an inconspicuous car would take him to the Turkish border, he knew he was leaving behind not just a city and a woman, but a part of his own soul that he would never recover. The blue stone weighed down in his pocket, a ballast that pulled him to the bottom, even as he emerged to the surface of his true life. In front of him, a perfectly drawn espresso was cooling. There was no dregs at the bottom, nor the overly sweet taste of cubed sugar that he had learned to tolerate. Everything there was refined, safe, and silent. No one looked at him twice. No one tracked his phone. He was just another face in the cosmopolitan crowd. A man in his mid-30s with a vacant gaze and good-quality clothes. Reza Husseini was dead. He had died the night he crossed the Turkish border in the back of a carpet truck, leaving behind his identity, his friends, and his conscience. Daniel Lavi had survived, but he felt like a ghost inhabiting the body of a stranger. He opened the tablet on the table. The habit of checking news from Iran had not disappeared, although his supervisors had recommended total decompression. Step away from the theater of operations, they said. You did your job. Now forget it. But oblivion was not a key that could be turned. The headline on an independent news portal based in France was brief and clinical. Tehran University completes renovation of Central Courtyard. Daniel clicked on the article. There was no political text, only a note on the revitalization of the academic space. The photo that accompanied the article, however, screamed what the words were silent. It showed the side wall of the courtyard, where students had previously surreptitiously painted a vibrant mural of birds flying from an open cage. Farhad had drawn the sketch. Yasmin had bought the paints. Now the wall was an immaculate white. The fresh paint had covered the birds. It had covered the colors. It had covered hope. It was an aseptic void, a tabula rasa imposed by the state. That blank space was the final monument to the effectiveness of Daniel's mission. He had not only dismantled the network, he had helped erase the memory that she had once existed. He closed the browser flap, feeling a bitter taste in his mouth that the coffee couldn't disguise. The week before, during the final debriefing in a windowless room at the embassy, the case officer, a man named Eitan, had been effusive. It was a textbook work, Daniel, Eitan had said, flipping through the final report. The dismantling of the Alvarado cell prevented the consolidation of a national leadership. We fragmented the movement before it became a systemic threat. You've saved years of agency resources. And the targets? Daniel had asked, his voice neutral. What happened to them? Eitan shrugged his shoulders, a bureaucratic gesture that dismissed human lives as if they were operational expenses. Most were detained for re-education, some released on heavy bail. The leadership. Well, the lead is out of circulation. Yasmin Farhadi. Eitan had paused for a second, looking at Daniel with a warning expression. Subject A is in administrative custody. No trial forecast. It's better this way, Daniel. She was the catalyst. Without it, the chemical reaction does not happen. No trial forecast. The phrase echoed in Daniel's mind now, in the cafe in London. It meant limbo. It meant cells without light, endless interrogations, slow and painful oblivion. Yasmin, The brilliant engineer who dreamed of bridges and connections was now isolated in absolute silence, probably wondering where she had gone wrong, who had betrayed her. She would never know that the traitor was the man who had held her hand and promised safety. She probably still kept the memory of Reza as that of a hero who had escaped, someone who continued the fight somewhere. This was the ultimate cruelty. He had allowed her to maintain admiration for him, turning that admiration into yet another tool of his own psychological torture. Daniel reached into his coat pocket. His fingers found the rough texture of the braided rope and the smooth surface of the blue stone. Yasmin's keychain. He carried it every day. Not as a good luck charm, but as a penance. A physical weight to remind him of the moral weight he couldn't let go. He looked at the street again. People passed by in a hurry, worried about schedules, the weather, bills to pay. They lived in a world of surfaces. Daniel lived underground, in the rotten foundations that supported that normality. He remembered the conversation with Mariam Eskandari in the library. Loyalty is a matter of geography. She was right. He had been loyal to his geography, to his flag. He will protect his we by destroying the they. But sitting there, thousands of miles away, the lines on the map looked like meaningless blurs. He had won. The mission had been an absolute success, but the victory had the taste of ashes. He realized that for a brief time that fall in Tehran, he had been the best version of himself. Like Reza, he had purpose, he had passion, he had someone who looked at him as if he were capable of changing the world. Like Daniel, he was just a man who erased murals. He called the waiter and paid the bill. He left a generous tip, a habit of those who try to buy redemption in small installments. As he stepped out onto the cold street, Daniel squeezed the blue stone in his hand one last time before dropping it into the back of his pocket. He wouldn't throw it away. He would carry it. It would be his invisible scar. He adjusted his collar against the wind and began to walk, blending into the crowd, disappearing again. He would continue. There would be other missions, other names, other masks. But he knew that somewhere dark in his mind there would always be a sunny courtyard, the sound of pages turning in silence and a white wall where there had once been free birds. He was the guardian of that void, and that was what weighed the most.